mess up a sequence, and I have to come back as one of your hairpins. I know that the morning.
Have you ever heard a voice that sounds like an old friend? Takes you right back to the kitchen. You can almost smell the cake that your grandma made on your birthday.
Have you ever laid on your back?
It is. One, two, 1, 2. 1, 1, 2, 2. 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 1. 1, 2, 1, 2. wish I had a little table or something here, but
That's okay. We could.
I'll just put the book here.
That little chair we can move over here.
Oh,
Yeah. A little kid chair.
I think that's good. All right, let's get started. Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. It is wonderful that you took the time to join us, and it's good to be back at Knuth Brewing Company in downtown Ripon, Wisconsin. Also, this event is live streamed on Wisconsin Eye, and I would like to welcome all WisEye viewers tonight. I'm Henrik Schatzinger, Director of the Center for Politics and the People, and I'm also a professor at Ripon College. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Center and the College Republicans at Ripon College. We always enjoy your active participation, and there will be a Q&A after about 35 minutes into this conversation with our guest today. And once we get to that part, I will ask you to line up next to this microphone here so that viewers online can also see you. We are very fortunate to welcome back Benji Backer. Benji, I think the last time you were here was 2019, so it's really good to have you back. Benji is founder and executive chairman of the American Conservation Coalition, the country's largest right-of-center conservative youth environmental organization. He's also founder and CEO of Nature is Nonpartisan, a nonprofit aimed at normalizing the environmental conversation in a way that transcends political boundaries. He is here tonight to talk about his new book, The Conservative Environmentalist: Common Sense Solutions for a Sustainable Future. Benji has been named to the Fortune 40 under 40, Forbes 30 under 30, Greenbiz 30 under 30, Grist 50, and as a New York Times changemaker. ABC News listed him as one of the top 5 youth climate activists you need to know. He has authored articles for various national news media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Times, and Newsweek, and he has appeared on The View, Fox News, and NBC News. Benji is a native of Appleton, Wisconsin, and he has a bachelor's degree in business administration and management from the University of Washington's Foster School of Business. Please join me in welcoming Benji Backer. Benji, it's really good to have you back. I'm really excited to make this happen tonight.
It's great to be back.
And before we go into the book and talk about some of the solutions part, maybe you can share just a little bit of what you are up to today. When we emailed you, you felt very passionate about your new adventure. Nature is Nonpartisan, but you're also flying a lot around the country to make change happen. What are you up to?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. There's a million things you could be doing tonight, and sitting at a brewing company for a political event is probably, not always at the top of people's lists, so I appreciate that. I will say it's the most Wisconsin thing ever to have an event at a brewing company. I can't say that I speak at brewing companies very often, so it's truly a pleasure to be back in my home state. I slept in my childhood bedroom last night. I gotta say, I every time I go home, I'm reminded about how psychotic I was as a 10-year-old, because the room looks exactly like it did when I lived there. My parents, decided to just leave it the way it was, and there are political posters plastered all over the wall. Every square inch it looks like maybe out of like a horror movie. And it has like Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, Ron Johnson. It has like all these like eclectic old political signs, and so it was really fun to go to bed to that last night. But it's really great to be back because not only is this my home state and I love this state so much, But it's a really critical time for me personally. I'm about 3 weeks away from launching Nature is Nonpartisan. I've spent the last, almost 17 years of my life working in politics, and it's been this incredible journey from campaigning and putting these signs on my wall, campaigning in Wisconsin for candidates in middle school and high school, which in itself is a little bit psychotic as well, to founding ACC, which is the largest conservative environmental organization in the country. We've got two incredible staff from ACC here in the front, Aiden and Luke. And what I've realized is that, we have to take the environment out of the culture wars in this country. Because, as I was driving here and watching the sunset and thinking about my love of the environment, there's nothing more important that transcends party lines than our environment. And it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal. It doesn't matter if you voted for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. This is something that we need to work together to solve. It's something that our country used to work together to solve. And we're gonna talk about that, I think, in a little bit. But this issue used to not be caught up in the culture wars. And starting the largest conservative environmental organization, the goal was to fill that void and bring the right back to the table. But at the end of the day, I don't really care what political affiliation people have. We need to solve these challenges in front of us. And climate change is real. Environmental issues are real. We need to protect the places that we love to hike and hunt and fish. And every summer I spend up in Minocqua water skiing and being on the lake. I don't care what political affiliation people have when I'm in those places. This is worth protecting regardless of where we are politically. And the fact that it's gotten caught up in this culture war is a huge problem. So I'm about to launch Nature is Nonpartisan to rebrand the environment in this country as a nonpartisan issue, but also advocate for policy areas that Americans agree on. Over 90% of Americans agree that we need to protect our air, protect our water, protect our public lands, protect the places that we love to recreate. I mean, these are common sense things that unfortunately have been shoved by the wayside for so long. So that's coming up in 3 weeks. I also just got back from the White House. Before this, I came here from the White House and trying to work with this administration on a big environmental package because, if you're going to be nonpartisan, you have to work with anybody, regardless of who wins the election, to get something done. And so we can talk more about that as well. But it's great to be back here. I just appreciate the invite, and it'll be a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to this environmental package because we hear a lot of things in Washington, but we don't hear all that much about that part. Let's go back. I want to understand how Benji sort of ticks, right? You started when you were about 10 years old or so with starting your own activities. And so I was wondering sort of how has growing up in central Wisconsin shaped you and your understanding of nature, conservation, environmental issues? What really motivated you? How did you get started?
Well, my parents are entrepreneurs, and they started a business out of Appleton, and they always instilled in us that we could do anything we wanted as young people to make a difference and to start something when you're young and to make a difference when you're young. My sister was like the volunteer of the year for Appleton. I have two older sisters, and the Post-Crescent had named her the volunteer of the year in high school. And so I had a good role model in my sister, had a great role model in my parents. When I was 10 years old, I had this weird freak ankle injury that put me on crutches for a year and a half. And because I couldn't do much for sports, I watched the presidential debate between Barack Obama and John McCain. And I was really inspired by, just that whole entire process between the two of them, but I was also really inspired by the way that they respected each other. I remember that moment in Iowa where, John McCain was confronted by an activist about Barack Obama being this radical Muslim from Africa and this conspiracy thing. And John McCain saying, hey, look, I don't like Barack Obama, but you can't lie about this guy. He's an American who has similar values in terms of wanting to save this country. We have different ways of getting there, but don't disparage, a fellow American that wants to do the right thing. And it was around that time when I was watching this debate because I couldn't do anything, to be a young kid running around, but also just kind of watching this process play out and being like, wow, this is a really cool thing. So I asked my parents, could I go volunteer for John McCain? And my parents, who are not political at all, were like, sure, that's a little weird. And I forced them to put yard signs in our yard and bumper stickers on their cars, which of course they hated because it was like really taboo at the time to talk about politics. I feel like now everyone just tells everyone about how they feel, and it's basically like, F you, I feel this way. F you, I feel this way. And back then it was like, you didn't bring that stuff up. So I started knocking doors and making phone calls, and I really started to realize, not necessarily at the national level, but at the local level, how much you can make a difference. I remember volunteering for this campaign for state assembly where, and my friend Tim here will remember this, Dave Murphy, he won this primary by like 52 votes. And I had been working like 40 hours a week in high school for this guy and volunteering for him. And I know that difference in votes were people that I touched and my fellow volunteers touched. So I could see that, my activism helped sway an election, and that this was something that actually mattered, like dedicating your life to service of, candidates and campaigns. It's not just like this talking point. It truly makes a difference. And so it instilled in me that I should keep going in that way. And, throughout high school I was active. I spoke at CPAC my freshman year of high school, the largest conservative political event in the country, and had a Fox News interview. But really what it came down to is that I felt like, even though I couldn't vote, right, I was 14, my voice had barely changed, that I was making a difference in politics, and that people were listening, and that the next generation was desired in political life. And you see whether you agree with them or not, the fact that the Greta Thunbergs of the world, the AOCs of the world, the Mike Gallaghers in Wisconsin, of the world, people take young leaders seriously these days because they want fresh ideas and fresh leadership. And I was seeing that at such a young age, and it was really inspiring to me. And I think growing up in a battleground state where things probably couldn't have been more contested. I mean, we all remember the protests at the Capitol with Scott Walker. Like, we were in the center of American politics. Growing up there, feeling like you could make a difference was kind of how I got into this, and I guess I've never left.
Let me come back to your first answer, because you teased us a little bit with the White House trip and an environmental package that got me thinking. What's in that package? I want to know. And before we go into the book, please.
Did everyone sign an NDA?
Please share a little bit of what you are discussing there.
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, before the election, I was planning on launching this organization called Nature is Nonpartisan. The environmental movement is incredibly broken right now. The Sierra Clubs, the NRDCs, these big environmental organizations used to be able to work across party lines to get things done. Their board was partially conservative, partially liberal. Their staff was partially conservative and partially liberal. Their advocates were partially conservative and partially liberal. That doesn't exist anymore. What I'm trying to create is an organization that spans party lines and is able to be effective regardless of who wins an election. So my goal pre-November was to say, no matter who wins this election, we are going to make the most out of that moment to make bipartisan progress on the environment. Because that, at the end of the day, that's what we should be aiming for as people who care about the environment and conservation, is how much progress can we make in this moment with the leaders that we've been given. And so right now, we've taken a look at what would Donald Trump and Republicans and Democrats in Congress be willing to work on together. And we're truly on the precipice of the biggest investment in American conservation in history. I know that sounds like, if you are in the middle or on the left, it probably sounds like a shock. We are on the precipice of doing something that has been, is larger in terms of investing in our public lands and wildlife and ecosystems and recreational access, hunting and fishing, protection of our beautiful public lands and investing in restoring them, fighting forest fires, doing these sorts of hands-on conservation things. We're closer to a historic investment in that than we've ever been before. And the reason is we're meeting people where they're at. Donald Trump wants to be the 21st century Teddy Roosevelt. He's actually said that publicly. Democrats want to get something done in this administration, and they want to be able to do something proactive for the environment. Why not take where everyone wants to be and try to create a vehicle to get that done in this current political context. So we're very close to getting that done. I think we'll have some pretty good updates over the next few weeks. And we're going to, I think, by doing this, most people think it's really unlikely for the president to buy into this sort of strategy, especially people on the left or in the middle. I'm hoping that it resets the entire dialogue in this country, because for so many people, he's the least likely person to embrace an environmental strategy. And I understand a lot of that skepticism. If he were to do this, I think it would reset the entire dialogue, that this issue doesn't, even in the most unlikely scenario, have to be caught up in the partisan culture wars. There's, every day in politics right now feels like 10 years. Like, every time we look at our phones, there's some new update, right? Like, it actually, like, there's probably something that's going to happen during this next hour, and we're going to have to catch up with it afterwards. That's how fast things are moving. But this is one of those few things that could root Americans back with each other, that could ground Americans back with each other. And if we're going to fix American divisiveness and in the partisanship in politics, there's no better issue than this, and I think we're going to prove that that's possible, even amidst what people would think is the most unlikely situations, to invest in American conservation.
You mentioned it's a really big investment here. We like to make breaking news. Are there any dollar amounts you can share with us in terms of how big this investment is?
Somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion.
Okay. Well, thank you for the very precise answer. We will now move a little bit into the book, right? And I don't want to get too deep into it, because I'm looking at the title again, The Conservative Environmentalist. It doesn't seem like there was much competition for this title in the past. So when I saw it, I think about, this looks like, sounds a little bit like bittersweet, definite maybe, kind of oxymoron. But at the same time, conservative, we both know, right, means to protect, to keep intact. So keeping the environment intact doesn't sound all that controversial, right? And so if we go back in history for a moment, 1970s, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, right, they signed very important legislation. We had Clean Water Act, we had establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, and many other things happened. But then 1980s roll around, and things, I think, then really changed. Talk to me a little bit about this. What has changed, maybe like sort of between 1960s and 70s versus like in the 1980s and afterwards? Yeah,
well, I actually want to ask you guys, in 2024, does anyone have, or now it's 2025, I guess, it's February. You're welcome. I just let you know what year it was. Do you have any guesses of what percentage of Americans self-identify as environmentalists in the name of my, in the theme of my title? Any guesses of what percentage? What do you think? 40%. Okay. 5%. Woo. Any others? 70. Okay. 40% is exactly correct. So you get a free beer, I think, is how that works. Sorry. He says yes. Perfect. What do you think that number was in 1990? Any ideas? 80. Wow. Did you guys team up on this? It went from 80 to 40%. So this title of the book, that sounds like an oxymoron, was not an oxymoron that long ago. Now, I wasn't alive then. But in 1990, 80% of Americans self-identified as environmentalists. Today, it's 40%. It's not like everyone just started hating the environment, right? Like, especially Gen Z and millennials coming up in this generation, the fact that that's in consideration with a 40% number, a low number. It should even be higher than what it was in the 1990s based on what young people care about when it comes to this issue. The topic has been hijacked by partisan politics, just like everything today. I mean, you don't have to look far if you log on to Facebook or Twitter to find partisan politics with literally your loved ones, let alone our politicians. And the fact that the environment has gotten so hijacked into that is a huge part of the problem. So the reason why I use that title of conservative environmentalist is because it is an oxymoron, and I'm trying to break the narrative that we're in these stupid boxes that we've put ourselves in. My parents are conservative vegans from Wisconsin. I was a conservative activist that lived in Seattle. I didn't get in fights every day when I was there. My parents, are conservative vegans in Wisconsin. No one cares. Like, we are so in this silo of, like, we all have to be this way or the other way. We're either conservatives or we're environmentalists, and that's just not how the world works. Nothing is that black and white. I care about the environment literally more than anything else. I moved out to Seattle for college. I went to the other UW because I wouldn't say the better UW because I also love Wisconsin-Madison. I was talking to my friend Tim this morning. I really struggle when they now have to play each other because I was like really sad when Washington joined the Big Ten because I was like, now I have to choose for a team to root for when they play each other. But I moved out there because I wanted to be somewhere where I could hike and ski regularly. Like, the environment is everything to me, but I'm a conservative, and it just shocks people, right? But it shouldn't. I mean, the most avid environmentalists, the term is supposed to mean somebody who cares deeply about the environment. Those people are often conservative too. And I'm trying to break America, and I think we all need to do a better job of this, of, like, not assuming that because someone is liberal that they, like, want to tear down your business and tear down the country. Just because someone's conservative doesn't mean they hate the environment. Like, this is so toxic for our country, and it's not moving us in the right direction. And so that's why the title is The Conservative Environmentalist. My publisher, Penguin, didn't want to do that because they thought it'd be too controversial. Conservatives would look at it and be like, environmentalist? I don't want to buy that book. And environmentalists would look at it and be like, conservative? I don't want to buy that book. And I'm like, that's exactly what we want to do then. Because I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to change the narrative that America has to be this fragmented and broken because it's screwing our entire freaking country up. We deserve better. We deserve better than these boxes that we put ourselves in and these stereotypes that we've set for ourselves. And as somebody who grew up, I think just seeing my family be these, like, conservative, hippie, vegan people, I was like, this is not how the rest of the world perceives. I mean, if I tell somebody that I'm conservative, my parents are not what they perceive. And so I think just growing up with that was a big reason why the title is that. And I think it speaks to the fact that to solve environmental challenges, we have to work with literally everyone that's willing to sit at the table. And people are going to come at this issue for different reasons. Someone who hunts and fishes is going to protect the environment for a different reason than someone who hikes or skis, but they have the same desired outcome. If you shop at REI or you shop at Bass Pro and Cabela's, you might have totally different lifestyles, but you want the same freaking thing. And that's exactly what we're trying to prove by proving that nature is nonpartisan, building the political bridge to action, and making sure that out of all the issues, this is the one that gets out of the culture wars, and the book is meant to just help move that forward as one of many pieces that we're working on.
So let's talk a little bit about the solutions part, right? Because there are many books out there that talk about problems, but like about your book, you did the hard part, but just talk about ideas and solutions. Perhaps we can just, you advocate for market-based solutions to environmental issues. Can you just walk us through a specific example from your book where free market principles have been successfully applied to address an environmental issue?
Well, yeah, and I think first I want to address the first part of your question, which is that in politics today, everyone is just talking about the problems and not about the solutions. I mean, you look at Fox News or CNN, you turn that on, and no one's actually talking about what we should do about a problem. They're just complaining about a problem, and they're getting elected based off of that. They're also raising money based off of that. I hate to bring you into it again, Tim, but we were having lunch today, and you were like, talking about how difficult this is because most nonprofits and most politicians raise money and raise interest based off of pointing out how the other side is wrong. And then they don't have anything to do to replace it. I mean, think about Obamacare, for those who remember that. Repeal and replace, repeal and replace, repeal and replace. And then they replace, they're like, I don't know what to do. And they actually had a chance to do it 1 million times. So that's the problem with American politics, is that there aren't any people actually talking about solutions because they're not sexy. It's easier to just blame the other side and be like, the Green New Deal sucks. And then it's easier to say, like, the right, hates the environment. And Sierra Club can raise money off of that, and the Republican groups can raise money off of that. And that is exactly the problem. So the reality is, because that's the problem, and I don't know how to solve that in the short term. That's actually why I believe market-based mechanisms are largely the best ways to solve environmental problems, because you're basically saying, okay, the government is so broken. We've let the inmates run the asylum. We've got Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC trying to create policy. That is not healthy for our country, okay? So let's have innovation and technology help get us there. And I'm not saying the government doesn't have a role. I'm literally meeting with the White House and trying to get the government to do what they need to do on this. But the United States has reduced carbon emissions more than any other country in the world combined. And that's with our politics being as broken as they are. And the reason why we've done that is because of technology and innovation. It's because we've transitioned from coal to natural gas. It's because nuclear and renewables have become less expensive because of technology. It's because our cars are more efficient than they've ever been. You know, the mileage on my car getting here today compared to what it would have been 25 years ago is substantially better. It also saves us money at the pump. Those are the sorts of things that technology and innovation creates. And I used to bring up Elon Musk as an example of this, but now it's like even he's in the culture wars. It's perfect. But he, you know, in creating Tesla, you know, it's obvious that the driver of that was the opportunity to profit off of producing a more efficient car for Americans. Now electric vehicles are a decent chunk of vehicles in this country, and whether you like EVs or not, that's helped reduce emissions because technology has gotten us there. So I just think, you know, as politics are so broken, the marketplace and innovation and entrepreneurship and, you know, this next generation of people my age, like so many people in this room, to come up with solutions that are profitable, that lower costs for people, that make people's lives easier, those are going to lower emissions and decrease environmental impact more than the government's going to be able to do, especially with how broken it is. And I think you can see America's progress on reducing its environmental impact, despite how broken politics is, as a proof that market and the innovation-based way is at least a critical part to getting us to the solutions that we need to get to.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about technology and the power of innovation in your book. I wanted to ask you actually if you can share us a little bit, a little more about some of the emerging technologies nowadays. Everybody talks about AI and possibly what it can do. Can you talk a little bit about some cutting edge maybe solutions that would really help solve some bigger problems?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few really great ideas out there. I mean, I think the next generation of nuclear technology is critical to being successful if we're going to reduce emissions and protect the environment and also give people energy at scale. We're expected to increase energy production around the world by 50% over the next decade. 50%. So when people are talking about like taking off coal from the grid or taking off natural gas, that's not a beneficial strategy as we're trying to actually increase energy across the world. Now, part of the reason is there are societies in other countries that need energy more than they've ever needed it because they now have it and they now know how to innovate and they now know how to like have an industrial revolution like we did. But partially it's our fault because we're using AI and these things that take up massive amounts of power generation. So you need 24/7 power generation to power the grid so that we can have the lights on in this room that we have on. So nuclear is a 24/7 option for that. The problem with nuclear, as you probably know, is that it just takes a long time to build and it's very expensive, but it is carbon free. So there's these really great next generation nuclear companies where the nuclear reactor is literally the size of like this little circle of you and I, or the size of one of these tables, and it would power an entire city. And that's the sort of innovation and efficiency that we need. There are a lot of companies that are breaking through on that. And for those who are worried about like nuclear radiation, totally understandable based on historical events, but the technology has evolved so much where that's not as much of a worry. I don't mean to freak everyone out, but like I've been as close to nuclear waste and radiation as you and I are right now, and we're pretty close right now. Hate to say it. So we have, like, I think we've over-dramatized the safety problems of nuclear power. A person who works at a nuclear power plant for 60 years has less radiation than an airline pilot does. So if you are smart about it and you keep radiation and spent nuclear fuel secure, it's actually a very safe thing. And so if you can make it smaller, and you can make it less of a footprint, not take 10 years to build and billions of dollars, that's a breakthrough technology. Another breakthrough technology is geothermal energy, which is something that we're getting really close to. Iceland is fully powered by geothermal pretty much. What's really cool about geothermal is that we've pretty much got unheard of reserves of geothermal energy below the surface of the earth all over the world, and so there wouldn't be like a supply that we'd run out of. But it also it creates an equivalent amount of jobs as the oil and gas industry does. So one of the problems with the solar and wind industry is that you lose a lot of jobs when you have solar and wind because it doesn't take as many people to operate those things. Geothermal uses the same technology and processes as oil and gas with the same amount of workers, and so you'd be able to keep our economy strong if we could get the cost to go down. So there's a lot of different energy sources, and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, there are trillions of dollars being put into the next generation of like pro-environmental businesses, and it's really easy to find that there are hundreds across the country that we could work towards.
Given our time constraints, how about I throw a couple of sort of keywords to you and we do a little speed round so people get a better sense of some of the other ideas, because there's so many things happen in this book, and I want to just get your thoughts on a couple of them. Carbon taxes and cap and trade systems. What's your take?
Politically, really difficult. The fact that carbon pollution doesn't have a price on it, I think, is a problem. I mean, even Ronald Reagan talked about how pollution should have some sort of price, right? If you have water pollution or air pollution that, is harming people's health, it does have some sort of economic disincentive to be bad. There's a disincentive to be bad for the environment. I think a carbon tax, or carbon price could work, but politically the right doesn't like new taxes and the left doesn't think it's far enough, so it's a pretty tough thing to get done.
And then you argue for permitting reform, right? Permitting reform. What is it, and how does it work, and why is it important?
Well, there's nothing more wonky and boring than the two words permitting reform. I go to sleep just thinking about it, and we shouldn't talk about it for too long, otherwise I might go to sleep up here. But permitting reform basically just signifies the fact that we take about 10 to 15 years in this country to approve new energy projects. And about 90% of those projects are clean energy projects, and the government takes 10 to 15 years just to approve them. And by the time 10 or 15 years has passed, the technology's completely changed, the energy landscape's completely changed, innovation's completely changed, and so no one wants to invest in building something in the United States, a solar field, a wind turbine, a nuclear plant, or a natural gas facility, because it's just gonna take so long. And the government needs to get out of the way in terms of those sorts of things. Like, we have to be allowed to build in this country if we're going to actually solve these problems. I am helping GE Vernova and some of these big clean energy companies think through this it's like Joe Biden put in the Inflation Reduction Act, and now Donald Trump's gonna reverse it all, and like everyone around the world's like, what is the United States even doing right now in terms of its energy production? You add on top of that we take 10 to 15 years to even approve energy production. People don't want to invest in the United States to build energy projects, and that's a big problem because there's not only political inconsistency, but there's also these massive delays that the government has put in place that are absolutely avoidable. So I know ACC and our organization, Nature's Nonpartisan, we're both pushing for permitting reform at the national level.
Let me ask you a little bit about tailoring energy solutions to specific regions. You make the case that we can do a better job of finding solutions based on the resources and the climate of different regions, like obviously solar power in Arizona and wind in Iowa and so forth. Is this a feasible approach to like all regions, or does this only really work under ideal conditions? Can you just a little bit elaborate on this idea of tailoring these solutions?
Well, I think our politicians, everything in politics today has become so nationalized in terms of like talking about the issues. And when it comes to the environment, there's nothing national about it. Like Iowa has a completely different weather pattern than Florida, has different geography, has different resources. And to have the government say there's a one-size-fits-all way, you have to be 100% this by this date when it doesn't actually make sense, is super backwards. So the example I'll give is, I lived in Seattle for 6 years, as I mentioned. If anyone knows anything about Seattle, which has aged me decades, is that it rains a lot. It rains literally like 300 days a year. So solar doesn't make a lot of sense there. But yet the city and the government mandating 100% solar in Seattle, which they did, kind of backfired on them, because then they didn't have power in an affordable way when the sun wasn't shining, which is, again, most of the time. So when you're trying to do this one-size-fits-all policy, it ends up backfiring on the environment. California tried that approach. They banned natural gas and nuclear because they wanted to mandate solar and wind, and they now use more oil and gas than they've ever used, but it's all coming from other countries. It's coming from Venezuela, Ecuador, Russia, Iran, and China. That's where their energy is coming from. And so they're not only importing dirty energy from dirtier countries in the United States, but that's also made energy prices double the national average. And so my whole point in using these examples is to say communities and states need to do what's best for their community and state without trying to think of this like globalist issue that is real. Like, we do need to improve our environment at a global scale, but Wisconsin's energy choices, environmental choices, are going to be different than that of Arizona, where I live right now. Arizona doesn't have any water. Wisconsin does. Wisconsin doesn't have a lot of sun in the winter. Arizona does. Like, things are completely different in each state, and we should be doing things that are the best for each state and each region, rather than trying to do this one-size-fits-all policy and end up having it backfire for everyone else.
Okay, I have 2 more questions, then we'll go to the audience. You write that states like Florida and Alabama, they do a good job working with private landowners, hunters, fishermen, in terms of getting it right when it comes to conservation efforts. How do you see local communities like those in our region, maybe here in central Wisconsin, playing a role in implementing the kinds of solutions that you discuss in your book?
Well, look, if there was a forest fire that happened in Minocqua, in the national forest up there, I would rather trust the people there to help fight it than someone in D.C. And that's the problem with the environmental movement too, is that it's so focused on a good example of this in real life was in Montana. They have these big forest fires on national forest land every summer, and the state is legally not allowed to help fight it because it's on national forest land. But yet the people who live there know exactly what they need to do to solve that problem. They can't fly a helicopter and put water on the forest fires, something so simple as that, because the government doesn't allow it to happen. So when you empower local stakeholders to have an investment in their environment, they're going to succeed 9 times out of 10 or more. Wisconsin knows how to take care of Wisconsin better than D.C. knows how to take care of Wisconsin. Arizona knows how to take care of Arizona better than D.C. does. And in some of these states, they've figured out a way to say, if you're a hunter or an angler, or you're an outdoors person, or you're part of the forestry industry, you know the environment better than anyone else. You're the closest to it. You have the most investment in its success. You actually want it to succeed more than anybody else because you either recreate in it or you rely on it to survive. Farmers and ranchers know how to take care of their farm and their ranch and the area around it better than the government does. We should be empowering local stakeholders to take control of protecting their own environment and let them do what they need to do rather than having these top-down government regulations. So I think Florida and Alabama do a great job. People don't realize this, but Florida has a lot of forest with evergreen trees, not just, alligators. And they for a while had a lot of forest fires in Florida. And then they empowered the local landowners to be able to go in there and thin the forests and manage the forests. And now they are like one of the least forest fire heavy states in the country. They were in the top 10 for a while in terms of having forest fires. But the local landowners are allowed to take action there. The government said that they can, and it's worked out for them.
Well, before I ask the last question, I will just let you know that this is a good time to actually get started here and line up behind the microphone. Then we don't have to sort of lose time. I will ask one more question, but the floor will be up then to you. We don't filter any questions. People just walk up here. So maybe I'm just wondering, what is one bold, unconventional idea in your book that you think could revolutionize perhaps the way we approach environmental challenges?
The fact that it should be nonpartisan, first of all. I mean, we're not going to solve this if it's just caught up in, every 2 or 4 years we just undo what the other side does. That unfortunately is kind of unconventional these days. It won't be very soon. I promise you that. We are going to make the environment a nonpartisan issue again. I can promise you that. In terms of an actual specific, the really exciting idea that I'm gung-ho about, that I think probably sounds like a wacky idea since I gave a very platitude answer to start, is the idea that Canada and the Pacific Northwest could use existing pipeline infrastructure for natural gas to transport water that's going into the Pacific Ocean down to Arizona and Nevada and Southern California, where they have a water problem, and use water that was going to be wasted and put into the Pacific Ocean to solve the water drought crisis in the Southwest. That's a bold idea that I think is going to happen at some point.
Interesting.
Interesting.
I have more questions, but I think it's a good time to move to our audience. Michelle.
Welcome. And welcome home. Luke Dretsky's here.
We do love Luke Dretsky.
Yes.
Favorite Ripon guy right here.
That's right. Would you talk about a value associated with the Republican Party or the politically conservative, or one or two of their values, and how their values support the environmental movement? I'm thinking about how to convince people who think that being a conservative means that you have to be against the environment. Thank you very much.
Really great question. First of all, the word conserve is in the word conservative. We want to conserve our planet for future generations. We owe it to each other. If you're religious, we owe it to God. We owe it to each other, though, to protect this environment for future generations. We have so much beauty and so much to protect around us that is worth investing in. It's good for our country. It's good for our economy. If you empower people the right way, it's good for individual liberty and freedom, which is something that conservatives care about. And it's good for our national security. I mean, it's good for all the things that we care about as Americans to protect and conserve our environment. And no matter if you are a freedom-loving, gun-loving, Christian, or you are, an urban liberal person or anything in between, we all have a stake in this together because it's important for our kids and our grandkids. It's important for the future of our country. We do not have a healthy America if we don't have a healthy environment. And if we don't realize that as conservatives and liberals, then we are, in the short term, we might succeed. We might extract all the resources. We might do all the things we need to do to get ahead. But long term, it's going to ruin this country if we don't work together. And so if you care about the country, you care about your religion, you care about the economy, you care about national security, investing in environmental protection is paramount to all those things. And if you're a conservative, you should care about all that.
Good. Next question from Kat Griffith.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comments. You dispensed pretty quickly with the carbon tax, and I wonder what you think of the idea promoted by the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is also quite bipartisan, about a carbon fee and dividend, where rather than the government taking in the revenue is actually sent back to consumers so that we don't become poorer, we just make different choices based on what they cost. So you're raising the cost of fossil fuels, making other things relatively cheaper, encouraging people to move in the right direction, but not forcing anybody to do anything. Do you think that's more politically palatable to conservatives, or do they hate the semi-redistributional aspect of it?
It's a great question, so thank you for asking it. I think CCL's onto something with that. I don't know if our politicians in our country is there yet, but I think we could get there. I think that it's a very reasonable approach. The reason why I like it is because it does it's not inflating the size of government. I would say it's not redistributing the wealth. It's just saying, instead of taxing pollution for the sake of taxing pollution and inflating the size of government, we're also going to help everyday people pay their bills and not inflate the size of government. I like that. What I am fearful of about it is that trusting the government with that sort of approach is a little bit risky because the government's not good at complex things like that oftentimes. And what I've seen happen in Washington State, where I used to live, and British Columbia, is that it's increased the price of buying gas for the everyday person, and it's been harder for people to make ends meet, even though the concept in itself was really good. So I think it's the implementation that matters, and I would say as long as it doesn't raise costs on low-income Americans and low-income people around the world, then I would be for it. But it's just all about the implementation. I think from a political feasibility standpoint, it's a little bit difficult right now. I think we need to break through the partisanship on this issue before something like that's possible. But that's one of the better ideas I've heard, despite kind of those hesitancies that I have.
Great. And I also want to encourage students to ask questions. We love questions from college students, and so if you have any thoughts or even a comment, we'd love to hear it. I think next up we have Gary Wetzel.
Well, I actually kind of have two questions that I think kind of go together. The first is, if we were to pave over every square inch of the earth, but the groundwater was pure and the air was great to breathe everywhere, would you say that we had a good environment? And then along with that, if we're all in agreement about the environment, then we're all basically 90% of us are in agreement that the forever expanding economy forever is a true ideal.
I would definitely disagree that, if we could pave over everything and have clean air and water, I mean, our society wouldn't exist if that happened. We rely on the environment so much for our livelihoods. Not only do we use it for resources that we use every day, I mean, look at the wood on these tables right now. We also rely on the wildlife and the whole ecosystem. Like, it's like that butterfly effect or monarch effect or whatever. When you destroy a species of wildlife, it has a bigger effect on us than we think it does. When we have it's not just hitting deer on the highway, which, is, Wisconsin legacy item. Overpopulation of species impacts humans. Underpopulation of species impacts humans. Our inability to grow food and protect wildlife is something that would be a complete threat if that were to happen. So I do think that's why the government does have a role in protecting the environment. And I'm a fiscal conservative, but a fiscal conservative means limited smart government, not no government. The national parks, as an example, are in my opinion, I'm very biased, but are the best thing that America's ever created. They're by far the best thing. And the last thing we should do is privatize those and leave it up for development. So the government has a role to play in this, and I think it has to be a balance between the federal government, the state government, the local government, and the private sector. The problem that I have with the environmental movement of today is that the first default is only the government. It's saying the federal government will solve all of this, when in reality, it has to be a balance between all of those different, between the individual, the marketplace, the local government, the state government, and the federal government. The federal government does not have all the answers, but it does have some of the answers, and it is important for us to make sure that we're not just, developing the economy for short-term opportunity to destroy the environment that could, basically destroy the world. And I see what's happening around the world. Actually, in the United States, as someone who's been traveling around the world a lot, we do it, despite our politics, we do have a model that works better than almost anywhere else. The rainforest in Brazil is being destroyed at astronomical levels. Europe is pretty much all developed. Asia is being developed at a crazy level as well. China's destroying their environment. They have one of the most beautiful physical environments in the world. It probably rivals ours, and they are destroying it quicker than you could ever imagine. So yes, we have to be careful about not overdeveloping our world. We'll be fine. Our generation will be fine. But if we're talking about future generations, we have to balance economic prosperity and environmental protection if we're going to have a future.
Yeah, next question.
So in America, we currently have the issue in the past with wildfires, especially in the Southwest. We also historically have had an issue with military service veterans being homeless or unemployed. Is there any sort of initiatives out there to bring men or women that have served in the armed forces into these firefighting services to fight wildfires. That might be another way you could bring more conservatives to the table negotiating.
I love that. I love that. First of all, forest fires are a complete travesty to our country. We're spending almost $1 trillion a year of your and my taxpayer dollars on fighting forest fires and restoring communities and ecosystems after forest fires have wreaked havoc on these communities. A lot of that is preventable. Over 90% of forest fires are started by humans being stupid. It's started by cars being broken down on the side of the road, by people putting cigarette butts out the window, by bachelorette and bachelor parties gone wrong. I mean, it's truly, it's sad what's happened. You know, baby gender reveals, like literally almost every wildfire is started by humans being dumb. And not only should we stop being dumb, which is, you know, probably a good thing in general, but we also need to take better care of the forest. The Native American tribes got it right. If we manage our forests correctly, we can have a healthy ecosystem. If we control burns, prescribe burns, clear out dead brush, not plant trees too closely together, we can actually stop a lot of these wildfires from, you know, sparking into what they actually are. So that's the first part of that. Second is, I would love to see a world where we have a second conservation corps, a 21st century conservation corps, where young men and women, where, you know, military service members can get paid to have a job, to go out and get their hands dirty and help the country restore ecosystems. There's nothing more pro-American than that. And that's something that our government should support and deploy. So we're working on that at the federal level. You could do it in a way that doesn't just inflate the size of government. You could work with local agencies. You could work with local nonprofits. You could work with local NGOs and organizations to help fulfill that duty. But, you know, as we're, you know, the younger generation is largely kind of uninspired and, you know, unwilling to kind of go into these sort of spaces. I think that sort of conservation core idea could help us get to a better future, but also put people to work, that want to go out and do things, do a fulfilling job that makes people proud. And that's something that we're missing from our society today. I think a conservation corps could help us get there too.
Very good question. Next question.
Hi, so just kind of as like a general comment to kind of follow up on like how we do need to help the environment and kind of the government role in that. Something that has kind of come up very recently was the National Park Service and how there was over 1,000 jobs that were lost due to a lot of the massive government cuts that have been made. And that's kind of a general concern because it's like almost oxymoronic in terms of you want to help the environment, but it feels like you're kind of taking away all of the opportunity for that.
Totally. I'm really glad you brought that up. I was hoping to talk about that. The tougher the question, the better, and that was a really good one. So I think really what it comes down to is that, you know, whether you agree with Elon Musk and Donald Trump or not, they're cutting a decent chunk of the government, and it's being applied to everything. There's not a single thing that's being left untouched. And so it's not like they're picking national parks specifically. It's just that they're caught up in this warfare of cutting the government. Now, my role, Nature's Nonpartisan's role, ACC's role, I'm not going to convince Elon Musk not to do that. What we can make sure that we do is rebuild and re-protect those sorts of things going into the future, replace it with something even better. And I can promise you that if we're successful with this conservation package, that those job cuts will seem like small potatoes compared to the progress that we were able to make. I'm not saying it's going to be successful. I'm hoping that it will be. I'm pretty confident that it will be. I'm not. If you're skeptical, I heard some laughs. Like if you're skeptical of that, understand that. I'm fighting like hell to make sure that these places are protected and conserved, and that this gets overshadowed by something even more positive. And I hope that will happen over the next few months, and I'm confident that it will.
Okay, you've talked a little bit about regulation, and that's a good thing. It's possible to overregulate, and I think we're kind of in that situation now. But it's also possible to underregulate. And underregulation leads to untrammeled capitalism, which leads to the Cuyahoga River on fire. Yeah. And so I wonder if you have insight to where the sweet spot is.
That's the most common. If everyone had that answer, we'd be. I wouldn't even be up here right now. Great question. I think the balance is having. You're right. Underregulation and overregulation are both a threat. Overregulation with like the Endangered Species Act, for example, everyone wants to protect endangered species. Since the Endangered Species Act was implemented in the early 1980s, less than 5% of those species have been delisted. There's been more species added than delisted because it's a broken system that doesn't work. So, and it's because it's overregulated, which I can get into a different time. But underregulation sets the rivers on fire. So the sweet spot, I believe, is for the government to set parameters and have local and have incentives for local leaders to step up and meet those standards on their own way, so that there's actually buy-in from local communities. If you were a landowner on the Endangered Species Act, for example, the current model is that if you have an endangered species on your property on a farm just outside of Ripon, Wisconsin, the government can come in and basically take control of your property and tell you what to do with that land. Of course, if you have endangered species on your property, you're not going to tell the government that you have endangered species on your property because you don't want the government to come in and tell you what to do with your land. So there's this philosophy of what they call shoot, shovel, and shut up. You shoot the species, you bury it, and you don't tell anybody about it because you don't want the government to come and tell you what to do with your land. That's not a workable model. What would be workable is for the Endangered Species Act to incentivize landowners to take care of their ecosystem so that that endangered species animal can survive. And that if it's able to survive, that person or that landowner or that company or whatever it is has an incentive financially or with taxes or whatever to come through on that. So I think it's a matter of the government should be involved, but incentives are often better than mandates, and setting parameters that people can work through in their own way, they can solve the problems in their own way, is better than putting everybody in the same box and expecting them to succeed.
So my question is related to what you just brought about, and I'm glad you talked about the Endangered Species Act. So I read about 3/4 of your book, full disclosure.
Thank you. You made it that far, huh?
Yeah. No, I
didn't even make it that far.
So it's easy to quantify carbon.
Yeah.
Right? When you're talking about making these changes, it could save so many tons of carbon. In your discussions, how do you quantify biodiversity and endangered species and the importance of those? Because it's, in my opinion, not as easy.
Yeah, completely agree. It's definitely not as easy to have a financial incentive to protect nature. That's why I'm excited about some of these like natural carbon markets where you are putting a financial positive on keeping natural spaces natural. I mean, there's these trading opportunities for people to like offset carbon by using nature, and that would ensure that it's protected. You're restoring nature, but again, that goes back to the government's role. Conservation of public spaces and wildlife is something that is not trackable like building a new building's economic value is, or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the price that should cost. So I don't have the perfect answer in terms of how to quantify the importance from a financial standpoint of protecting nature, but what I do know is that there are hundreds of billions of dollars of economic value added to the United States through our national park system. What I do know is that hundreds of billions of dollars of value are keeping our forests and other public lands healthy because we use that for so much of our country's livelihood and recreation and access. So there is a financial incentive in that way, but of course, developing those places and making them big tourist destinations could even have a bigger financial incentive, which is why I'm grateful that over 90% of Americans would not want to develop our public lands, why over 90% of Americans would not want to destroy the waterways and the wildlife and the biodiversity of this country. It's politically smart to protect these places, and we have to be able to have the government play a role in that. It's not just going to be the federal government, though. State parks, local parks are some of the best managed in the world. They don't have a big deficit like our national parks do. They actually bring in income for the states. They've turned it into a model where it's a benefit to protect these places. And so I think because it's a shared value and because it's provided a lot of economic value to states and local communities, that protection of those places will win the day.
Hi, Benji. My question relates to the contradiction in our own federal government on environmental policy. So I'll give you an example. The government pays farmers through the Farm Bill and crop insurance to grow monocultures of corn and soybeans, which are nutrient or fertilizer dependent and are known to run off into waterways. Our government also pays people to clean up those waterways.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can speak to, in this era of efficiency, it's a really inefficient way to manage these environmental systems. So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that, and how do we cut through the partisan and lobbyist noise to, in the most efficient way possible, I guess, do the right thing, I suppose.
Are you speaking specifically to like the impact that, just to clarify, that ethanol and soybean production is destroying kind of the aquifers below the surface of the earth, and like how we're trying to clean up our waterways, but we're also depleting the water quality at the same time?
Right, or that corn and soybeans require a lot of fertilizers as compared to more biodiverse cropping systems. And then we grow corn to put it in our fuel tanks, which then make our cars less efficient.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, first of all. Big ag is a big problem. There are positives of big ag. Big ag allows us to feed the world at the scale that we need to with 7 billion plus people. They also don't want change at all. And they don't want farmers to adapt to technological changes. They don't want them to use better farming practices that actually would increase crop yields, because it's change. It would cause a ruckus at first. They like how stable things are, and they don't want things to go any other way. So I think that's honestly the food and the big ag problem is probably the hardest problem to solve, because they have such a grip over American farmers and over American industry. They are farmers are so reliant on big ag to survive. They get their direction and their instructions and their technological advancements from big ag. Breaking through that is going to be really difficult. I don't know how we do it, but we are destroying the water quality in the Midwest because we're growing ethanol that doesn't actually do anything for society. It actually hurts society more than it helps. And big ag doesn't want people to know that, because it would change the entire course of how farmers use their property. So the biggest lie in the world is that ethanol is a clean energy source. The biggest lie in the world is that ethanol helps cars become more fuel efficient. And it's all perpetuated by these big companies that don't have farmers' best interests in mind, and they're just perpetuating a problem so that they don't have to deal with the solution. And I think at some point, when enough people realize that, maybe some change will come, but we're also trying to push for some of that change right now at the federal level too. Yeah.
I will say we have time for 3 more questions, which actually works perfectly. So after that last third question, we will have to stop.
So earlier you mentioned how in 1990, around 80% of people would consider themselves environmentalists, but nowadays around 40% of people would consider themselves as such. Do you think that's more of a cultural decline, or of people just from the parties themselves putting themselves against each other, or would you consider that more of people having just laws passed that hurt them, like the invasive or not?
Endangered Species Act, yeah.
Endangered Species Act.
Really good question. I think it's a little bit of both. If you look at the party breakdown of who considers themselves environmentalists, it's almost all Democrats today, where it used to be completely across party lines. When you say the word environmentalist, I often ask the crowds, what comes to mind? and you can probably guess what comes to mind is a bunch of people that all are on one side of the aisle. I mean, it's Greta, it's AOC, it's Bernie Sanders, it's these sorts of people, Leonardo DiCaprio. And so I think it is the association with one side of the aisle. But I also think, as I write about in the book, middle America and like conservative America, rural America, has been totally forgotten about a lot of the times in environmental discussions. It's been mostly focused on urban communities and like, oh, we can all have electric cars. And it's like, well, the farmer doesn't actually feel like they can have an electric car. You know, Gavin Newsom mandating electric vehicles by 2030 rings pretty hollow for a farmer that needs his truck and doesn't have the money to buy a new electric vehicle. And so there are, you know, mandates and regulations that have come down on a lot of Americans who tend to be more conservative, has also pushed them further away. So I think it's both. What we're trying to show is that whether you're rural or urban, whether you're conservative or liberal, there are solutions that work for those communities, and it's not just this one-size-fits-all. Like, and that's where I blame conservatives. Like, if you don't like the left's ideas, come up with your own ideas. And that's the whole point of a democracy, is to have both sides compete with ideas. And the left has co-opted it, but the right has completely ignored it as well. And so it ends up making the problem worse and worse and worse, and the division worse and worse and worse. The policies become more one-sided, and then the rhetoric also becomes more one-sided, and that's how we ended up where we are.
Hi there.
Hi.
I have like a math problem and perception problem, but when it
You're not
comes,
going to make me do a math problem.
No,
up here.
I'm
Okay.
not. But you're talking about 90% of the people, and this is a figure that has been polled in Wisconsin related to our Knowles Nelson Stewardship Funding Program, which is named after a Democratic and Republican government. 90% of the people value public land and outdoor recreation on public land. It's $1 trillion industry in our nation. It's huge, but yet it has become, and so you have 90% of the voters then that value this, but it is partisan because we're right now looking to reauthorize this program in Madison. It's in the current budget fight, and it has become politicized because one side wants to run it one way, one side wants to run it the other. And so how do we decouple this? I mean, and it's what you're talking about. I mean, I know that you probably can't answer this, but I'm frustrated because we have this common sense thing that everybody here in this room understands. It's been studied to death, but people recreating in natural spaces are healthier than people recreating on the sidewalk in downtown Ripon.
Right.
It is good for us. It is recognized. Everybody here has been in a special place and felt that and knows. And we're fortunate we have a lot of those around here. And so you have public sentiment that desires that. In Wisconsin, we have this program which is actually 50-50 funded. It doesn't even happen unless the local people pay 50% of the cost of a project.
Right.
And yet politics gets in the way of supporting that program. How do we collectively, I'm involved with a nonprofit organization, the Green Lake Conservancy Land Trust, that does that, and the Green Lake Association and others, but how do we advocate for this? We run up to this political firewall that seems illogical.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and that's exactly what I'm trying to go out and solve, because it's not reflected in our national politics or our state politics, this shared desire to protect and conserve these places. It is truly shared. To your point, it's 90+%. I don't even know where these 5 or 10% of people are, because I haven't even met them. I don't know if they don't exist or if they just had to like say, at least somebody disagrees with it. But most people around this country, conservative and liberal, want national parks to be protected, want local, conservancies and local parks to be protected. I would say that how we're going to solve that is to show politicians that that's actually how Americans feel. Right now, there's no organization that resembles America across the political spectrum that's an environmental advocacy organization. The Sierra Club was meant to do that. The Sierra Club used to have, half conservatives, half liberals. Right now, only Democrats hear from Democrats on the environment, and Republicans hear from Democrats or nobody. And so we're trying to show politicians that both sides want these things to be protected. That's why we're launching Nature is Nonpartisan. I'm hopeful that Nature is Nonpartisan, when we launch, and I'm brought back 5 years from now, hopefully, like I was 5 years ago, we can say that we are the biggest environmental organization in the country, by far the biggest in terms of political diversity, and that plus or minus 5%, we're half and half conservative and liberal. Because right now there's no organization that provides an incentive for a politician to do the right thing on the environment and be rewarded by people no matter where they stand on the political spectrum. The most moving thing that I experienced in terms of this from an anecdotal perspective over the last few years was I was on stage with the most far-left Democrat in the Florida legislature, and she said, "I effing hate Ron DeSantis." She said that on stage, except for the environment, because he's put the partisan politics aside to conserve the Everglades and provide resiliency. I want that to be the norm. I want us to say, I might not vote for you, I might not like you on a whole host of issues, but together we can work together to conserve our environment. And that's the future of where we can actually resemble that at the national level. That's what Nature's Nonpartisan is going to do, and that's what I hope all of us will do to provide that incentive for politicians.
Briefly, in Wisconsin, you can go to noelsnelson.org, and there's an opportunity to send a postcard if you're so inclined to your elected representatives on that topic.
Sounds like a great option. Thank you.
Hello, you've spoken about the government as if it is an undifferentiated whole, but there are actually three branches. And by implication, you've never mentioned what is, in some areas in the environment, been the most activist and effective, and that is the judiciary, which is also the least directly responsible to the people, or responsive. There are a large number of, not a large number, there's some organizations that have relied on the judiciary almost entirely to achieve environmental objectives. Of course, we have legal groups like the Environmental Defense Fund, the Natural Resources Defense Council. Sierra Club has a separate legal branch. And one especially effective that doesn't seem to make public news much is the Center for Biological Diversity, which is very active in filing suits. So I wonder where in the conservative environmentalist scheme of things the judiciary fits.
Really good question as well. I do find that a lot of those organizations tend to, we need to find a balance between the planet and the people that exist on the planet. And I find that those organizations sometimes don't think about the fact that there's also people living in these communities that rely on the ability to have their jobs and go to work every day, and that when they're trying to do these lawsuits, it's like the planet above all people. We have to, it basically shuts down industry, shuts down the economy in different areas oftentimes. We have to find a balance between the economy and the planet, people and the planet. People need to be able to work and recreate and utilize the environment at the same time that we're conserving it. I'm a conserve the environment guy. I'm not a hands-off the environment guy. When we don't allow people to touch or engage with the environment, it's kind of this hands-off approach. You're not allowed to engage with the environment at all. We're going to sue you from being able to put solar panels up because it's going to destroy the environment. It ends up backfiring because you're actually, being activist against the thing that you're actually trying to claim that you care about. So we need to be able to balance those things. I find that those organizations don't balance it, but then if they're not there, then there's really nobody trying to help on that other outward bound of the issue. So I think the judicial branch is a very important part of environmental advocacy, but I do think that it's oftentimes used to stifle people's livelihoods. And we have to be able to create an environmental movement that doesn't just work for the environment, but also works for people. And I have not seen that those organizations really balance those things very well.
Excellent questions. Thank you, everyone. I would like Benji to kind of, if you don't mind, just sort of make sort of a closing statement, and perhaps I will just sort of piggyback on the last question, which is, how do you make change happen? Organizations like we just heard about, who we go through the courts, they have very expensive lawyers, they have the resources. If they lose at the local level, they're going to go to the state level. If they lose there, they're going to go to the federal level. They have various ways, right, to make change happen for them. Or you mentioned Big Ag. They have very expensive lobbyists as well. So, I mean, as somebody like you who is being heard, right, who have testified in Congress, maybe you have some ideas or some positive message about how you can make change happen.
Well, look, I think over the next 10 years, we will make the environment a nonpartisan issue in America again. And that's going to unlock our ability to have this balanced dialogue. And it will take everybody in this room to make that happen. And it's also going to be breaking out of these stereotypes that we've, again, put ourselves in this country, that conservatives can't be environmentalists and liberals can't care about the economy, or whatever boxes we've put ourselves in. We're going to need advocacy to make natures nonpartisan, and the mission of it, which I hope people in this room, at least if they disagree with some of the things that I've said, that's the whole point, that at least the mission and the vision of building a movement that fights for the environment across partisan ideology, to make that successful, we're going to need all of us to break through those stereotypes. I would say we have, I don't know what the political makeup is in this room, and that's one of the I think the best and hardest parts of my job is that I can't just give a stump speech to just assume that everyone's a conservative or a liberal. I would assume that we're very mixed in this room, and that's the whole point. The fact that we're gathering in this room is a perfect example of what needs to happen. The fact that I'm working with Democrats and Republicans in Congress is exactly what needs to happen. And to stand up and advocate for these policies, regardless of who's president, regardless of who wins a Senate seat, regardless of who's our governor, to not give up when somebody gets elected that you don't like, and to just assume that nothing's going to happen, to try to meet people where they're at. These are the sorts of things that we need to do, because American politicians at the national level, but especially at the local and state level, do not hear from us at all. We're like too scared to engage because it seems too daunting. A tweet gets noticed by politicians. They don't want to be called out on Twitter, but they do love to be applauded by it. So let's applaud them when they do the right thing, and let's call them out when they do the wrong thing. They don't like op-eds that are negative. They love op-eds that are positive. Let's write op-eds when people do the right thing, and write op-eds when people do the wrong thing. I know people have very limited time, but you're here tonight. You spent an hour of your time doing this. I'd rather have you spend an hour advocating for the environment in your own personal life. Do that in a month from now, and it will go, a long way to shifting this narrative. And if you join us at Nature's Nonpartisan, we're going to give people an opportunity to connect with thousands of nonprofits that we're going to help match people to, that are relevant to their interests, their geographies, their political affiliation, all those things. But you can also go out there and do that yourself already. Like, we need more advocates. I'm 27 years old, people are listening to young people. So for the young people in this room, they want young people to stand up. But they're also listening to anybody, because almost everybody's sitting on their hands and doing nothing right now because things are so bad and so polarizing. So the best thing you can do is say, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to break through the wall, and I'm going to have people hear what I want to say, because no one's doing it, and you're going to stand out. And that's what we need to do to shift this narrative, is to have people across the spectrum reach out, say that the environment is worth protecting, Republicans, Democrats, and that's how we're going to make the change that we need to make.
Excellent. Can we thank Benji for coming to Ripon?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, we know you're very, very busy, so I really appreciate it. And also thank you, our audience, for being here tonight. Thank you, Knuth Brewing Company. Thank you for Clearview and Wisconsin Eye for filming this. And so we hope to see you in the near future. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.